I think we're good. I think we got everyone we need in here. I'm Glenn Archambault. I'm on the Pipeline Safety Trust Board. I've been bothering people all day about coming to this presentation because this is really, we've got a great panel here. This is a really interesting panel. Oh, here we got some more people. And I want you guys to really pay attention because this is one subject in pipeline safety that we can do something about it tomorrow morning. We can change the way things are in this nation. I can't change wall thickness or coating or a whole bunch of other things tomorrow morning, but you folks can change what's going on in the nation, and I think you people are well qualified to do that. So we're going to get started because we're in about 15 minutes per panel member here, but I'm going to point something out to you guys. I'm a long-time violator. Years ago, I did some terrible things in the whole subject of one call or 811. And I'll tell you that story if you find me some more cold beer tonight. I'll tell you about when I was a young backhoe operator, hooked a piece of pipeline, and I'll tell you the rest of that story tonight. Let's get our first member up, Coach. Are you ready?
I am.
From the Common Ground Alliance.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sarah Magruder-Lyle. I am the President and CEO of the Common Ground Alliance. Many of you know my predecessor, Bob Kipp. I am 10 months into the job, and I'm very excited to be here. I've not been to this meeting before, but thrilled to be invited here to speak. Just a little bit about me. I come from the oil and gas industry. I've worked upstream, downstream, midstream, worked with many of the companies in the room, and have done outreach for the industry and all those pieces of the industry. So this is something that's really important. Safety is something that's very important to the industry and to the utility industry in general. So this job in particular has been really great because this is about the safety and prevention of damage to all of our underground facilities. And so as I talk particularly today about some of these, I just want you to keep in mind this isn't just pipelines. We worry about everything. And as the Deputy Administrator pointed out, you know, while some of those things don't have the sensational repercussions when an incident happens, they can be very challenging. I've actually told a few people here I had a dig-in right across the street from my house the day before yesterday, and had the opportunity to show my children what happens. And they actually had called 811, and it was a mislocate. On the complete wrong side of the street. They hit the main water line, and my street was out of water for 4 or 5 hours, and so I got to do a neighborhood lesson on 811 and what happens. But it is nice to actually, you know, be able to go out and really teach people this is concrete. It's the first time my children have actually understood what I did for a living. They know you're supposed to call 811 before you dig any place. And they also told their father that when he wanted to go take a tree stump out, and my son said, "Dad, you have to call 811 first." So, I know many of you are familiar with CGA, so I'm not going to read this to you, but, you know, again, what we really want to do, our job is education and awareness. We really want to talk about, you know, increasing the awareness and importance of what 811 is and why it is important to make sure that you call before you dig. The Deputy Administrator referred to the every 9 minutes a facility is damaged because of a failure to call. That was every 6 minutes. And the new DIRT data shows every 9 minutes. That means we're getting better at what we're doing. And that's really important. That's the trend we want to see, that we're increasingly getting better at what we're doing. And, you know, we all want to have no damages. But 99% of the time, if you call, you are going to be free and clear. That's a pretty good statistic. And we want to keep working at that. And we're going to work, you know, elimination is always the goal. Elimination of damages will be our goal. But we're pretty happy with where we are today. So just a little bit about our stakeholders. We have 1,700 members, 240 organizations and companies. Many of the companies in the room are members of ours. And we like to always thank our sponsors who are really dedicated and active. We only have 6 staff members, so we are very lean and mean and do a lot with a little, as many of you do. 7 working committees and 23 board members. And so we are very, very busy, and a lot of what we do is sweat equity. Most of what we do, everything we do is consensus driven. And so that means that each of our stakeholder groups has to agree with what we're doing. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about how important that is when we talk about best practices in dirt. So, 2.6 million miles of pipeline across the U.S. And I know that's what everybody in here is mostly concerned about. But one thing I'm concerned about is the rest of the utilities around the country, which puts us over 20 million miles of cable and pipe in the ground. That's a football field worth of infrastructure for every man, woman, and child in this country. And as many of you know, most people have no idea what's going on under their feet. And that's not because we've been trying to hide something. It's just simply not there. The public is not necessarily educated about all those things that are happening underground. And even for me, as somebody who came from the oil and gas side of the world, I actually had an opportunity to go to Boston with one of the telecommunication companies and see how they're expanding their network. And it's unbelievable to see exactly how that works and all of the fiber that it takes to do that. So we have quite an amazing infrastructure that keeps our country going and keeps us moving. And we want to make sure that we keep it safe. So certainly safety and reliability is something that we're all very, very concerned about. And so are we at CGA. And we'd like to make sure that we don't even get to the point that we're talking about an incident. We want to make sure that we're preventing it as much as we can. So since 811 became the official abbreviated number of the call before you dig, damages have gone down 54% in 10 years. This year was the 10-year anniversary of CGA. So if you think about that number, a 54% reduction in damages just by educating people about calling 811. That's pretty amazing. Next up, we have our core programs. And really, if you look at best practices, 811, and then DIRT, those are kind of what I call the top triangle of what we do. Those sort of work, in concert. We want to make sure we educate people about calling 811. And we want to, DIRT is our damage information reporting tool. If there is an incident, we want it reported into DIRT, and then we use that information to go back and look at our best practices. What do we need to do? How do we make sure that we look at, those areas where we have high damage rates and that we're reducing those instances and work those through the best practices committee. The most recent version of best practices was published in March of this year. The interesting thing about the best practices is all 16 stakeholder groups have to agree. So there's a reason that this is sort of the gold standard in the industry for best practices. Excavators, locators, operators, all the stakeholders have to agree on these best practices. And so I encourage you to take a look at them on our website. And it's really great. They've been used in a lot of states as sort of the foundation for their laws. And we're thrilled that they're being used like that, especially because of all the input. It takes about 2 years for a best practice to make it through the process, which is because we want it to be thoroughly vetted. We want everybody to really buy into those practices when we put them out there. Damage prevention awareness. This is the absolute most important thing we can do is call 811. We spend a lot of time on calling 811 because the statistics show that's where we need to spend our time. 99% of the time, if you call 811, you'll be free and clear. There won't be an incident. So that is the most important thing we can do is encourage people to call. Our regional partners network is very important too with educating local communities and local businesses about the importance of 811, of best practices. And so we really use those partners, and we're very appreciative of those who participate in the regional partners. I'm going to talk a little bit about DIRT. The damage information reporting tool, which is very interesting. And if you look through this, we'll go through some slides about what exactly is in DIRT. And let's talk a little bit about what data is collected there. So these are the types of data that we look at. And our task team that works on this does updates. They revise the questions. They want to make sure that we're getting the data that is most useful to people to look at, so that when they are reviewing it, that it's useful. What are those root causes? How can we reduce those? Is there a best practice we need to implement to reduce those damages? So the most recent DIRT report, which includes 2016 information, was published on 8/11 day this year. It's our highest event submissions. We're very pleased with that. And this is the first time we'd ever done societal cost of damages. And that's important because, you know, we talk about certainly we want to minimize injuries, casualties, those are very important. But when we start thinking about the cost to our communities, that's really important too. $1.5 billion, and that's a low estimate. That you know, for the economists in the room, that's the direct cost. That's not the indirect and induced. That's just the direct cost. So that's a real challenge and something we really want to look at. And I think as we go out to educate policymakers and those in the community, we need to really think about those things as well. And we also added this year a interactive dashboard that includes PHMSA's determinations of adequacy. And I do want to compliment PHMSA, certainly during a time of transition. They went out to all 50 states, they talked to the stakeholders, and they worked with them to talk about, you know, adequacy and put these letters out to the states. And I must say, as somebody who is a former lobbyist, there were several states that turned around legislation to make themselves adequate in a very short time period, which for those of you that do those things know that getting any legislature to move anything in a year is a challenge, much less than a few months. So a big hats off to PHMSA and their team for doing that, because I actually think this was really something positive and something useful for those states as well. So let's talk about the estimated total damages. As you see on this slide, that middle sort of gray bar, it's getting narrower, which means the range that we're getting at is better. The more data we have, the better off we are, the more concise we can be about root causes. And so you'll see that back in the beginning when we first started doing this, we had a very small number of actual reports, and those numbers have continued to grow, and our range has continued to narrow. So you do see a slight uptick in damages, but that also has to do with the increase in construction spending, where we're building. We're starting to do things in more dense areas with more population, but the trend is going in the right direction. So this is a breakdown from the DIRT data of the major root causes. And if you'll notice, the top two are notification not made and excavation practices not sufficient. So, and if you look, you'll see that as the increase in awareness of 811 has gotten better, that excavation practice not sufficient has gotten bigger, because obviously as something gets smaller, some other area must get bigger. And so we're looking at how do we increase you know, the education on that side of the world. Now, that being said, I don't want my friends in the excavation industry to think I am blaming them, because, for instance, across the street from my house, it wasn't their fault. And so, again, there are a lot of groups that we have to talk about when we talk about just that excavation practices. You know, we need to make sure that, are we looking at locators? Are they being trained? Are the excavators being trained? Are they being empowered with, wait a minute, I'm not sure this is right, maybe we should stop. And so there's a lot of things and a lot of opportunities there to decrease incidents there. And I'm going to flip through the next few because I don't want to take up too much time, and I want to make sure you have time to ask questions. But if you look at these charts, you'll see, I'm just trying to divide them out so you can see, again, excavation practices, that is the biggest hunk of the excavation practices pie chart here, that the practices are not sufficient. If you look at locating, markings and locations not sufficient. That's what happened at my house. And this one, if you look at this, is just, I mean, it speaks for itself. Notifications not made. If you don't call, you don't have a chance. I mean, you're putting yourself in a losing position if you don't call to have your lines marked. And then there is also sort of this miscellaneous bucket, which is interesting and something that the industry has been talking about, things like abandoned facilities. For instance, abandoned facilities for pipelines certainly can be a challenge, but abandoned facilities for telecom, for instance, it's a dead line. It's not going to do anything. But the challenge is, well, how do you know that? If you dig in and, you know, said telecom company says, well, that's a dead line. Well, how do you know? Because we all know if you have an abandoned facility and a pipeline, if you get the excavator gets a visual on that and they think they've got the abandoned line and they actually have the line that's in use, that can be a problem. So that's something that industry's just going to have to work through. A little bit about the equipment types, which I think will be consistent. You'll see is consistent with the previous graphs. Backhoes, track hose are a challenge, and contractor damages are certainly number one here. But I do want to point out this, and I think this is important for perspective. What's damaged the most? Telecom, your internet, your phone, your TV. So we have a lot of work to do here, but it is also because you think about where are those lines generally buried, right? This far underground. So there's a lot to think about there, but I think this is important for perspective. Certainly we are here to talk about pipelines, but in the grand scheme of things, again, because we are concerned about everything, we want to make sure that everybody has perspective as we talk about these things. So just a few takeaways here. And really the important one is this damage per 1,000 transmissions. It's up a little bit, but the rate is going down. The trend is going in the right direction. And as we see construction spending increase, we're going to see sort of small up and downs, but it's going in the right direction. And again, the more data we get, the better off we are. We've talked a little bit about several of these, but the call before you dig awareness, it's consistent. And what I want to do is, as we look forward to the next 10 years of CGA, is how do we get beyond consistent? We've been at a plateau, which is a pretty good place to be, but we want to continue going up. And we want to work with our partners to increase awareness about the importance of calling 811. I want to talk just a little bit about our interactive dashboard for our dirt information. You can go in and splice and dice that information in a variety of ways. And this is the our PHMSA dashboard, and you can see this one is showing adequate, and this is showing the inadequate. And you can see all the different information that you'll see. But one thing that's interesting is if you look at this versus this, you'll see that the notification not made is the increasing piece of the pie. So they're just as simply, the data shows strong enforcement laws, strong mandatory reporting, those things all lead to reduced damages. We also have, you can go in and again you can look at various areas. We even have information from Canada. So please feel free to go in, look at your state, look at your damages. You can look at the trends. It's a great tool, particularly you know, if you want to look at the long-term trends in different regions of the country, which is also very interesting. Our technology committee is looking at a lot of the things that were mentioned in the Deputy Administrator's remarks. What are those technologies that can help us get over this plateau? How do we continue to reduce damages? How do we reduce that excavation piece of the pie? What are we doing to make sure that we're giving the industry the right tools to reduce those damages as much as we can? And they did a survey, and they will be putting out the study at the end of this year. So that will be forthcoming. And finally, what will the next decade hold? Well, we were talking earlier that when 811 was actually implemented as the abbreviated number, text messaging wasn't really even a thing. So we really are striving to look forward. We're going through a strategic planning process now, and we're really looking for input from our members. We put a survey out to our members. For those of you that filled it out, thank you. But what are we going to do? How are we going to use the technology and tools and opportunities to really move the ball ahead and increase awareness and reduce damages and keep our communities safe? And so with that, I think I stayed pretty close, and I appreciate it, and I'm happy to take questions at the end. Thank you.
Are you ready to go?
I think so.
That was a great presentation, folks. I want you to ask some questions and be prepared for the board's night here, and we're going to quiz you further.
I just want to add one thing. I have a bunch of these 811 calendars. I really encourage you to take them. I'm going to put them on the back.
Is that's part of the, is that the PHMSA calendar or is that the CGA?
Energy Save Kids, they're kids drive.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Dave Mulligan. I am a community liaison. My home base is Denver with PHMSA. So basically, I'm one of 10 throughout the country. And part of my role is to do the community outreach and engagement, right, under my directors upstairs speaking in terms of what that includes, right. So I just wanted to go through what PHMSA, so my presentation is focused strictly on pipelines, right. So Sarah's had kind of all utilities rolled in there in the dirt reports and everything. Mine's just on pipeline. So I wanted to brag a little bit about what PHMSA accomplished in between, 2016, 2017 fiscal year. We got new rulemaking out. In terms of 1st of January to where we are now with excavation enforcement, there was a new rule, right, that gives PHMSA the authority to look at excavators rather than pipeline operators and do the enforcement if they break those laws. Also to promote prevention and safe digging practices. This is where we team with CGA in terms of best practices and also help them out with the federal message across the board and everything. Outreach. A big thing that we did get engaged was, all 10 of our community liaisons, including our people back in headquarters, is to do a lot of training events and outreach. So we put together some brochures and made sure that that's getting out there in terms of the message, especially in the states that were deemed inadequate, that they have a law, but they're not enforcing that law. Data collection and tracking. I know Blaine mentioned upstairs in terms of the data that we're getting a lot better at analyzing it. But we only have a set of data through the annual reports that we collect that we can crunch that data. This is where the DIRT report that CGA was going through, that is more detailed in terms of that, what they collect. Grants. So we fund, there's 2 different grants out there that PHMSA funds the states. One is if it's a state program that is basically doing the pipeline safety within that state and they're certified, that they can say, hey, look, we're going to focus on damage prevention too as one of our pipeline safety initiatives. And so therefore they can apply for a grant through PHMSA. The other one is a one-call grant, and that is how are you going to excel your damage prevention? How are you going to improve that, right? Continuous improvement, and apply for those grants. State program evaluations, 52 states actually, well 50 states and 2 other entities, is that we completed those evaluations. So that was to whether we could say, this state, you're doing a great job, keep on going, or you're not doing a good job, you need to improve those laws within your state or that enforcement action. And then in the meantime, PHMSA has the obligation to enforce excavation damage that breaks the rules. So that was a huge going out to the individual states to do. State assistance, so helping with that new legislation. Those states that were inadequate, that we assist them, right? If they need help in their legislation, a lot of times when the federal, if we can communicate the federal rule and help them out with their legislation, that it can get through the process better and get new laws in effect. And then enforcement. Finally, enforcement, which is where we don't want to go, right? If there's no issue, then we don't have to go through enforcement. But enforcement of operators and excavators, I want to make certain that operators was already in place, right? As part of the original regulations with operators. But the new rule allows us to go back and enforce those rules against excavators. Real quick, study on improving the accomplishments. Improving, in August, we submitted to Congress. This was a study primarily focused on how can we improve with damage prevention. And it was primarily the technology, right? In that report, which is public, you can go out there and download it, is, how do we improve on location, right? When we do mark those lines, how can we improve in terms of closer to give the excavators, right, more information? Also mapping of those lines, right, down to a very, rather than our GIS is getting very narrow, within 1 foot, right, of, right now of accuracy. And then excavation practices, right? What's lacking in excavation practices? Sarah mentioned, right, they have a lot of best practices that everyone has to agree on. They put together a great book and put that out there for excavators to follow, but what message aren't we getting across and what kind of technology improvements? And then communications between the one call center, the pipeline operators, the locators, on down the line to the excavators. What kind of communication and improvement on that technology can we make? So that's a report that's out there. It's fresh, August, within the last couple of months, it's in there. Completed, like I said, 52 state evaluations in terms of are they adequate or not. Every state out there has an 811 law, right? You must call before you dig. It's whether they enforce that law is the major difference in the states. And later on, I'll have a map of what was adequate and inadequate. Just real quick, going through some accomplishments. This is more in terms of outreach, right? So each month, we have 4 primary months that we are engaged in, and we made a lot of progress. Each community liaison, so across 10, has a certain project to complete within each month, right? So Safe Digging Month in April, Safety Month in June, 811 Day, August 11th, whether it's, I think this year it's going to be on a Saturday, isn't it? So it's going to be a little different. And then National Emergency Preparedness Month. Even though they have safety in there, we're trying to roll damage prevention and call before you dig programs within each month in those initiatives. We did an 811 poster contest for the school system, so between teachers and students. We think that's a great place to start, right, for awareness for the kids, to get it out there and to carry that on. Great success. The winner flew a family out to D.C. to attend a Nationals game, right, and tour Washington, D.C. And then some other ones, major events. The Washington Nationals Day, 811 Day game we attended. And then NCSL is an interesting one. This is the National Conference of State Legislators. Each year, all the state legislators get together in one place. This year it was Boston. And they talk about new rules. But we had a booth there, and it was primarily an 811 booth, damage prevention, what PHMSA does and everything. And it was a great success, right? You'd be surprised how many people out there that don't know about call before you dig, right? That either live in an apartment, right, rather than a homeowner. That was an eye-opener, and we were able to talk to the state legislators directly. So that was a big improvement. And then Firefighters Instructors Conference. This is where all the firefighters get together, emergency responders, and discuss what improvements we can make. And we had a booth there. Accomplishments. This is probably just going down the number of impressions. Real quick, I'm going to put the posters up there. So this is just capturing, these pictures are just capturing stuff we did across the country. We did a lot of billboard campaigns across the country that, we had different messages with Pipeline and Hazardous Material Safety Administration. We saw one that said, call before you dig. Are you installing a pool? Are you installing a fence post? Are you installing a mailbox? That kind of did that same messaging. And then also the number of people, that's at the Washington Nationals game. There's our PHMSA finest with their T-shirts out there. And then you can see the bus is that's the Washington Regional Transportation District that we did a wrap. And then the other ones are just different ones across the country. I wanted to also mention radio and web campaign. We also did the radio and web campaign. So these are kind of similar to CGA messaging. We use a lot of CGA also, their toolkits. They do a real good job putting together their toolkits in that graphics picture that we borrow on our messaging. Okay, now the data. What does the data tell us? Remember, this is strictly pipeline data. We gather this data from our annual reports that are submitted each year. So we're a year behind usually in our data. They have to submit it by the March, I believe, March-April timeframe for each, and this is for hazardous liquid and gas. So across all the states, what is this data telling us? This is from 2005 to present. Pipeline incidents caused by cause. No surprises, right? Number one is material defect. Second is corrosion. Then third is excavation damage. So when we say, a lot of times we'll interchange, hey, it's the number one cause of pipeline incidents, right? It's still the major contributing cause. So it's in the top 3 all the time. And I think, I don't know if you guys can, yeah, the colors come across pretty good. Okay, this is more of the trend, right? The trend in terms of excavation damage, pipeline incidents caused by excavation damage. This is not leak related. This is excavation damage. So whether it's they nicked a pipeline, damaged the coating, an excavator, or they broke a tracer wire. But it's not related to the number of leaks, so I wanted to make that clear. So as you can see, the downward trend from 2005 to 2017, it's a downward trend. Now you can see in 2016, 2015, we're back up, right? What happened? The economy got better. They started excavating more. So you can see we still have a lot of work to do in terms of damage prevention and getting that word out. Okay, by root cause. This is similar to Sarah's, but a little different. So we broke it down. It's primarily 3, right? Were the excavation practices okay? Did they call 811? And how good were the locating services? And you know, within 38% down to 20%, it's kind of split in that pie chart. So we know that we need improvements on all areas, right? One is the leading cause, hey, you got to call 811 before you dig. But then we also need to work with those locators, right? The accuracy on location, the accuracy of that data. What information do we supply those locators to do their accurate job and get the information out there? Excavation enforcement background. So as of January 1st, right, Congress gave us the go-ahead to say, hey, look, you need to focus on this. We passed a final rule on January 1st, 2016. That's when we started to get our internal processes in place. Okay, now we got a rule, how are we going to implement that process, who's going to go out and do it, and go through the entire enforcement process. So we developed a form. First, we had to evaluate the states. Are they adequate or not? Do we want to, you know, hey, you guys are doing great, keep on going, keep on improving in the state, or give them a little push and say, hey, get your states up to par so we're out of your business. So we had a form to go out there and do that, and then develop an initial framework. This is all our internal processes. Okay, what if we do have an excavation damage? What kind of process that we have to do fair across the board in these inadequate states? Okay, this is what we came up with. So after the 2017 or 2016 go around, right? This is not a political map either. Red is bad. Red is inadequate. When we first started this thing, we didn't think we were going to have that many inadequate states. But as we evaluated our form, made improvements to our evaluation form, there's 26 states that are red. So they are deemed inadequate. What that means is if we have excavation damage in that state, third party, this is not a first or second party that the operator or pipeline company hired. This is strictly JJ's backhoe or whoever, typical contractor out there that damaged a pipeline, that we can go into those red states and enforce our rule. Now, we can't enforce the state rule within those states. We have to enforce our new rule, which is Part 196 of our regulations. And I'll go through that in a little bit, what that includes. How am I doing on time? Okay, the biggest difference in the states, it's the fines, right? So if there is excavation damage, where our fines are between $200K and $2 million for each fine each day, whereas if it was a state that had a fine, that fine can be from $50 to $1,000, right? So when excavators see this in that state, this kind of gets their attention. So we're using this to get their attention. We're not here to put an excavator out of business. It's more of awareness and to say, hey, you can't go willy-nilly and dig, right, with this infrastructure around here. It's dangerous for them, and it's dangerous for the public. General philosophy, like I said, we are not out there, the PHMSA rule, we're not out there to basically take over their 811 call before they dig program. We think of us as a backstop measure. We're just trying to push that state to get adequate rules so that we can step back and that we see the numbers going down in terms of excavation damage. So we're a backstop authority. We're only going to take the excavation damage cases that are going to make a difference. They're going to make an impact. They'll make the state legislation listen to make those proper changes. So primary goal, change state behavior. Like I said before, we can only enforce the federal standards. So we cannot enforce whatever particular state laws that they have on the books, but they're just not enforcing. We can't touch those. We have to follow our standard and our law. We cannot do anything in the states that we deemed adequate. So in Nevada or those states that you saw green, we have no authority in terms of the call before you dig law in those states. It's only the 26 inadequate states that we can go in and do the enforcement. Okay, what can PHMSA enforce? These are no surprises. One, the first one is, hey, you got to call if you're going to dig, right? And digging or excavating means a number of things, right? It's any movement of dirt. So whether it's tunnel boring, shoveling, putting in a fence post or anything like that, we do not care. It's moving dirt, so we call that excavation. And that's an eye-opener, right, to even homeowners a lot of times. Also, you have to wait for them to locate it, right? You don't just get on the phone and expect to locate within a couple of hours because you have a trencher out there and you want to get going. You have to give them adequate time. Lead time in each state, typically it's 2 days, but that's different state rules in terms of their response and for them to wait. Also, so once it's located, you're called. Once it's marked, the excavator then has to respect those marks. And this is where the best practices come in hand, right? So wherever the marks are, you can use mechanical equipment outside of those tolerance zones, but as soon as you get closer, then you follow best practices, which is usually hand digging until you can locate that line that was marked there and use that. So there's only 6 of them. So number 4 is make additional use of one calls. How many times are you digging in one spot where you're like, hey, we got to dig over there, but we didn't tell them to locate over there? Well, you got to call 811 again to extend your ticket. And you can't piggyback on another contractor. Failure to promptly report any damage, this is always new to them. If they do nick the line, and this is probably the story that you had, rather than contractor looking around, the excavator looking around, did anyone see, cover it back up, right? That a pig is going to catch later on, or you're going to have corrosion in that spot because you had damage to that line, is that you have to call the operator. Hey, I nicked your line, come out here and look at it. Maybe it's okay, maybe we'll just patch it, the operator will patch it, but you have to notify them. And then the final one is if there is a leak, if there's a small leak on a service line or anything, your first call has to be 911. So this is the federal rule that is out there as Part 196 that we passed in January 1st. Here's some more resources on our website. This is the latest link. So as some of you may know, if you go to the PHMSA website, just last week we changed the whole look of the website. And so a lot of the links have changed. But this is the latest link to find more information. And it's, you can see the data, you can see the state determination letters, you can see the new map. That's all public out there on the website. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I want you guys to remember all of that. An easier thing is to look at our website, and that'll all be up here in a few days.
That's it.
I have a question. I've had several people ask, are all the presentations going to be posted on your website?
I believe they are. Is that right, Kate?
Along with audio, video, well, video.
Which one's the advancer here, do you know? It's in here? Okay. All right. Got it. Good. Okay, thank you, Glenn, appreciate it. Well, by process of elimination, I'm not David, he just got done, I'm certainly not Sarah, so I'm Eric Sportley with UGI Utilities out of Pennsylvania. And I'm going to give you a little different twist here. We're going to look at those pipelines around that house and that cutaway there. And we're going to talk really about a local distribution company view. I call it the battle zone. Okay? Every day you're out there fighting, the numbers will start to reflect that, why it's a little different than the pipeline industry is in general. We'll talk about that, a little case study that we've done internally at our company, a little industry comparison, which I think puts in perspective what we can do about the things that David and Sarah did talk about, some things we can do to improve safety. What's in a Model 1 call law, because that's really where it starts. If you have law, it's great to have it. You have to enforce it. And more importantly, what can we do to improve safety? I'll finish with that. So again, a little bit about UGI. We're a Pennsylvania-based utility. I'll give some real quick numbers. The important reference here is that we have 1,678 employees, and we're going to use those in the case study I talk about, and we'll share that with you. Okay, so just little statistics there. Okay. At UGI Utilities, we provide safe, reliable utility service to the end user. That's the real difference. Pipelines bring the product to the utilities, and we deliver it to the end user. So we're in proximity. Okay, good. We're getting there. Sorry, I usually have an advancer. I'm usually a walker, so I apologize. I'll be I'm stationary today, but so we do that. And how do we do it? We invest heavily in stakeholder outreach and education. We'll do almost any event, any public forum we can get into and spread the 811 word to get people to do the right thing. And most people will. There's always an element that won't. You have to deal with them in a different fashion. But what we do is we bill aggressively for damages to our facilities. It's really without enforcement. We're not a strong enforcement state today. We bill aggressively. It's really the only tool we have to go after folks in courtrooms and whatnot of that nature. We also apply numerous tools in the form of programs, whether it be different sectors of the public and or excavation community, as well as technologies that we apply to do a better job line locating our facilities and or protecting our assets out there. When we compare our damage rates among our American Gas Association peers, we perform at a first quartile level. So we do fairly well overall in a state with minimal enforcement, minimal to no enforcement. We've achieved a 12% reduction in total damages based on the prior 8-year average. So you look back here, I'll show you a slide in a minute that kind of expands upon that. While experiencing a 60% increase in ticket volume. So the education works, the activity picks up, the work's going up. Okay, but at the end of the day, reducing damage is about improving safety for the public and for our employees. Okay, the most important thing we do every day. Okay. Little damage slide here, a little busy. I don't have a pointer. I'd show you the top is, going back to 29 with 512 damages coming to current day. We end our fiscal year end of September, so they're all fully loaded 12-month data statistics for our company, our damages. You look at the very bottom and you'll see that you run from 170,000 tickets. That's a lot of activity managed in a 45 county region, up to over 250,000. So big growth in that area. To keep running that number down year after year with more activity is quite an accomplishment, something we're very proud of. Okay. I'm going to talk about the N1C case study, and it says, does enforcement work? Okay. N1C means no one call, and we experienced a number of damages as a result of no one call, and we'll talk about that, and one of the core root causes that Sarah and David both talked about. Common Ground Alliance, when we started looking at this, 30% of excavation damages were the result of people not calling before they dug. Okay, we looked at our system, we're right about 29%. That's a staggering amount of activity out there where you have no pre-notice, no notification that somebody's working around your facility. Okay. In review, we were averaging 122 excavation damages of this type every year. Okay, it's a big number, big number. Reporting these damages for enforcement action wasn't really changing the behavior or the trend we were experiencing, so what we're going to do, we took a little different approach. In 2015, we developed a pilot in our highest damage rate area, 2 counties in Pennsylvania at our highest rate of damage, and we're able to reduce the damages by 57% in that 2-county area, so we knew it could work. Okay, that was really phase 1. We used our employees, we educated the employees in that region about what a marked out site looked like, what it didn't. The employees were the ones that have a little business card like this, that have it in their pocket. Tell them how to make the call, who to call, how to process it through. Okay? Huge benefit, huge opportunity there. I'm a member of the Pennsylvania One Call Board. We took this to the board, myself, a couple other companies in Pennsylvania, and in 2016 rolled it into an emergency type ticket. So now in Pennsylvania, you can call 811, report a no-call site where there's no markings, no flags, somebody doing excavation, and have a successful outcome there. So emergency ticket goes out to all facility owners, not just UGI. Water, power, everybody can go out and protect their assets. So a huge difference in expanding the project. We rolled it out company-wide, and we saw in the last 3 years a 48% reduction. That's almost 200 damages over that time period less. So a significant accomplishment in that end. Again, we used our employees. We engaged our employees. 1,678 employees now have a little education on what 811 is. They spread the word. They do the reports. And we have a reward system for them, an incentive-based process. So it worked out very well. Here's a little statistical view of that. You'll see the prior years in the blue, the green years, very successful. At the bottom, you'll see the averages out there I just spoke about. So again, the proof is in the pudding, and you can in fact take some ownership and be a quasi-enforcement agency, if you will. We had to call 911 a number of times to get the activity shut down. Okay, so it's not always an easy job, but our folks took it on and did a great job with it. Okay, I want to do a little industry comparison, because sometimes you can look at what others are doing and learn from that process, but consider the automobile industry of the 60s. I did a little statistical look at this. 1969 was one of the worst highway statistical years going in fatalities and injuries. Okay? Crashes were very high, very common. Insurance costs were skyrocketing. Okay? Our cost to do business as utilities are going up every day around here as well. Okay, so the industry responded by promoting 3 real tier items: education, technology, and enforcement. Okay? Seems pretty simple. We have similar challenges related to damage prevention in those 3 areas. When you look back at what we do and what's been successful, there's opportunities to really build on that. The question is, can we apply a similar approach? I'll give you a couple things to take a look at there. Many will be very common. You'll have seen them in ads, TVs, in your school programs, whatnot out there. So again, if processes that work very effectively there. You transfer that over to the excavation industry, education. We came up with one-call centers. Again, they vary by state, I think, as David touched on. Some are very robust. Some are getting the minimum stuff done. But again, there's a lot to learn, a lot to share in those environments. CGA comes along with best practices, great opportunity to look at sharing and building on a better process. And the 811 message, 10 years old today and still growing. Operator qualifications, ensuring that our people were trained, qualified, line locators, knew how to work safely around our facilities, other facilities. So it's all about training and documenting that information. And lastly, in 2011, integrity management came down the road and said you have to rank and model your risk, and certainly damage prevention is one of those risks out there, with excavation damages being what they are across the country and as well as in our company. Move on to technology. Locating technology, phenomenal. Plastic pipe has been around, and it's probably the primary source of distribution material in our business anymore. If you don't put a tracer wire in, you can't find it. It's been going in the ground since 1970. Sometimes the wire is compromised and whatnot. So they're very challenging. No technology today can locate plastic pipe. Okay? So it's really a huge opportunity to grow. There are tools that will help you to get there, but we're just not quite where we need to be yet. But it's going very, very well. Internal inspection cameras aren't new to the business, but what is new is they've taken it down to a micro size now. You can go into a 2-inch pipe, run 500 feet down the street, look at all your service taps in a block, correct your records, identify where you may have anomalies. Huge opportunities to really take technology to another level. Trenchless excavation, whether it be directional drilling, piercing tools that are out there, all looking to minimize the effect of the public, cost structure, install and replace facilities more economically. Risk modeling software from a damage prevention specifically. There's software to now where you can model your historical damages, which will predict where to put your resources, your time, your education, do a better job managing your risk out there. So big moves. Excess flow valves, we as a company, UGI, have installed those since the 1970s, so a number of years. It's probably one of the premier tools out there to improve safety in our industry. But as one of the folks in an earlier talk said, you strike a line, rather than having 60 pounds of gas blowing the atmosphere into a building, it shuts it down, makes it safe. So a huge opportunity to improve safety across the industry. Enforcement, there have been fines, and again, they vary by state. Some states are very strong on bringing the bad actors into lines. Some folks are not. Many states have adopted new law. I'm proud to say Pennsylvania has passed a bill. The governor signed a new one-call law on Monday, I believe it was. So we're anxious to get going there. It does put a couple things in place for us. It transfers the authority for the enforcement in Pennsylvania to another state agency, the Public Utility Commission. And we're hopeful that, by changing the sheriff, that we can change the culture in Pennsylvania. If we just change the sheriff and don't get moving where we have to be, we're going to have a challenge. So it's really going to require us to work together in a partnership to make it better and safer for everybody. So what's the Model 1 call law entail? Well, it removes exemptions. Everybody talked about exemptions in many of the talks today. It's a big issue. It affects different, facility owners different ways. But clearly, the rates show that the more exemptions you have, the more probability you're going to have of damages. So the statistics are in place there. It enforces the mandatory membership and reporting all in. That's important for the metrics, because if you have all the data in, you're really starting to put your funding, your education, your resources in the places where you know it's valid, as opposed to someplace trying to fill the gaps and guessing. Requires design phase and subsurface utility engineering. Damage prevention begins in design. If you start out planning to avoid damages, you'll be much more successful. The industry's not going that way. We're going more to design build, and I think we're losing some of the design capabilities there. So we've got to really focus on what's important to us in that arena specifically. Includes strong education and awareness component. Again, you've got to educate folks out there, and part of enforcement, in my opinion, is education. You've got to make sure that people get an opportunity to understand what the law is and be mindful of it, but you can't have continually, abuses in the law. So on the other end, you have to have a punitive measure for those who just disregard it. Unfortunately, there is that element out there. It's not significant, but it's enough to make a lot of problems for us in certain arenas. So we need to be tough on the bad actors. It also has to hold the project owners, such as UGI, accountable for our contractors that we hire and use. Okay, so it's a really important piece that we're using credible contractors to do the right thing, or trained and safe out there. Lastly, it seeks to build a CGA Regional Partnership and reward collaboration among stakeholders. These partnerships are sprouting up, and we have a couple in Pennsylvania we're very proud of, but they're really coming together and starting to build on all the overlapping projects that are out there and how you can, in fact, do them better, cheaper, and less impact on the public, and avoid damages in the process, because everybody knows where everything's at. So a big opportunity that way. Okay, Albert Einstein said we can't solve our problem with the same thinking we used when we created them. Okay, so we have to think a little differently. We have to think nationally, a little bigger sometime, and we can take it down to our own local shop, but we got to think about it on a bigger scale. Okay, focus on education, technology, and enforcement, key components. One call law, minimum standards. If we have different laws and they're all varying on what day, how many days, and this and that, how do you measure effectively and say, that's the best state, or that's the best practice, more importantly, so we can learn and share from that. So it's important to have some standards out there. Coordinate PA, I'll bang the drum for Pennsylvania One Call. There's coordination software out there that you can purchase. But PA One Call is purchased a software through an organization. It overlaps all this data. They already have our facility information, GIS data, in their database. So now as a water project comes in, a street project, they all start to overlap, and you see those real time. Your designers can see those, pick them off, reach out to the other utility. But it's coming together. It's just kicking off this month. We're very, very optimistic it's going to be a great tool to look at the design side of the business. Continued PHMSA R&D support to reduce LDC excavation damages. I was fortunate enough to be invited last year to the R&D conference in Cleveland. Myself and a few other LDCs gave presentations on needs we had for reducing damages and open ear, and I think people were listening to that. We appreciate the opportunity. I hope we can continue that dialogue, and there's opportunity really to build on some of the great discussion that was had out there. So hoping to see more of that. Kind of see something, say something, the approach, the no one call reporting stuff, it works. People out there want to be safe in your communities. As we roll this program out more from a community base as opposed to facility owner based, I think it'll get even stronger and stronger, and people will be wary about digging without calling, because some folks are just disregarding the law as it is. It's not all just ignorance. Gold shovel standard is something we've looked at UGI. It's a national program if you're not familiar with it. It talks about metrics, okay, measuring performance. It goes back to that project owner accountability, hiring contractors who are doing the right thing, the safe things. It's very contentious, but at the end of the day, if you're not going to be willing to move on a marginal basis, you're not going to get there. You've got to look at things that can, in fact, reduce those numbers dramatically and quickly. Okay. National Excavator Initiative is something else we looked at. It's really trying to catch that core market. If you look at the whole pie of stakeholders, we're reaching many folks out there. How do you get to the folks we're not reaching? We know what that group is. It's excavators, it's project owners who aren't holding folks accountable. But how do you get to that core group and get the message out there? We think, there's a blue-collar approach with Mike Rowe. There may be an opportunity to really get there on the safety message with 811 and some of the other things he can do, reaching out to the Workforce Development Initiative and getting that community engaged on the trade side. Lastly, a pet peeve of mine, electronic message boards. This requires collaboration, but I'll show you a picture, and it's really a national thing. Awareness at a national level, and why not? Okay, we all see these. We all have these in our state, on our toll roads and everything, electronic message boards. Many times I drive by them, I take pictures all the time. Many times they're blank. They're not being used. So why aren't we using them for something like that? Okay, no cost, the infrastructure is already in the ground. DOT is aren't we all one big happy family? Okay, can't we all just get along and move the message forward a little bit? So just an opportunity to say, you know, let's get out there on off-peak. That's not take away from the value added process they already provide, but let's get a window in there to educate the public, because it's a great awareness tool. You look at the ADTs on some of these highways, it's thousands, tens of thousands of people driving by, sitting in traffic. Imagine this sign flashing up there every day. Homeowner, if you haven't called 811 by Wednesday, you can't dig this weekend. Strong message out there, so good stuff. Okay. With that, I know there's a Q&A period, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Thank you much.
I have a little message for you guys. I've been to every conference for the Pipeline Safety Trust, that's 11 of them, and these folks are some of the best we've ever had on this subject, and I think that's a real mark of improvement across the nation, that we now have people of this caliber that could really focus in on those numbers. I think that's great, and I'll bet they'll answer a couple questions if we bug them enough. Anybody have a question out there? Go ahead, and we'll want to get this recorded, though.
So, Mr. Mulligan, with regards to the assessment of the adequacy of state one-call programs, have there been any states which have basically responded that they have no interest in becoming adequate?
Yes, there has. Now, there's been a couple of states that have contested our findings, and we're working with those states. There has been one state that says...
Alaska?
Yeah, that'd be it. So basically, Alaska said, we got bigger problems, right, that we're focusing on in our state, even though we know it's important, but please, PHMSA, come in here and you know, enforce the one-call law, right, so that's, they can change their behavior.
So is it PHMSA's plan to take an active role in Alaska, or?
Yeah, we have started doing a lot of things in Alaska in terms of communication with brochures, education. We've done a lot of excavation training up there that I've participated in, actually myself. Enforcement, we do have a couple of cases, yes, we have investigated. So.
Boy, we've got a lot of interest here.
Surprisingly. I'm Ed, and when I'm not interested in liquid pipelines, I'm also the chairman of the board of our local sewer authority. And can't have everything all at once. So our little municipal sewer authority, which is really pretty rural, we've got about 60 miles of lines, 20 or 30 pump stations, and 6 guys to run it all. Now, we get about 200 misdigs a week. It takes just about one of our employees full-time to deal with this, and of course we screw it up from time to time. And it's a tremendous drag on us to do something, send a guy out there that to me should have a vision of being totally automated. There's absolutely no reason in my mind as a computer guy why a guy can't put some coordinates into a map and get printed out his misdig map and have it all right there in front of him in 3D without me having to put an employee on it full time. I really think a vision for this group should be total automation of the misdig system, and I even can tell you how to do it quite easily. Call this company called Google.
Can I just address that? Sure, go ahead. So here's one of the problems. I live in Alexandria, Virginia. It's pretty old. There are things underground that most people don't even know are there. So that is a problem. We had an instance, boy, I'm just talking about all these, we had an instance in front of our office with the sewer. And the guys came out and they had to hand dig the whole thing because they just go, we just don't know what's here. That's not something Google can fix because they can't find something that's 130 years old underground. So you know, there are a lot of centers that do use GPS. Have you ever been to a one-call center?
No.
Who's been to a one-call center? Okay, if you haven't been to a one-call center, you should go to a one-call center because they do use GPS and they do use coordinates and they do use those things when the representative is taking the call. Because I've stood there and watched them in 2 or 3, including in Pennsylvania. So they do use them. But if you have an abandoned line or an old line, sometimes there's records that have been lost, but it's only as ideal as it can be. But when you're, you know, working in places where things have been underground for over a century, Google can't fix that until you find it and then you map it, right?
Well, of course, you know, I don't think that's much of an objection, really. We're working very hard in our little system to get very good GIS coordinates for everything we got. And we actually have gotten a large grant from the state of Michigan to do that. We're going to have it in place in a couple of years, and we're still going to be having a lot of expense, even though we know exactly where our lines are. And to support something that was said earlier, one of the biggest offenders in our system is another utility company. Okay? They don't think they have to call. They don't think they need to know where our lines are. They'll set a damn power pole right on top of one of their sewers. They'll know it and they won't let us know. So if they're exempt, that needs to be fixed too.
That one I won't comment on, but what I can tell you is if you haven't been to a one-call center, you should go, because they probably are using a lot more automated, computerized GPS system than you may be given the. I've been to 3 or 4 states, and all the ones I've been in.
Our stuff goes through a one-call center. We get a telephone
So.
call to our operator.
There you go.
Dave, have y'all actually started enforcing the laws in the states that are not done, or is it still in the process of figuring that out?
No, we have started enforcing that law. Right now, we do have the process of a reporting, so whether it's from an operator, the public, or specifically, believe it or not, other excavators, right? Some people are following the rules. They see some fly-by-night excavator that got the job, right, is not following the rules. They can report those excavators to us. So in those states where it's inadequate, we get the information, but we have to do a thorough investigation, right? So who's right? Was a locator right? And each one of these is a corner case, right? They're all pointing their finger this way, right? They didn't locate it right. They're inaccurate. Or we called and we dug and there's an abandoned line there. They said it was abandoned, it's not. So it's all over the place, but we have to do a thorough investigation.
So the follow-up, is there a single number that people can call PHMSA to report that? For example, we have a process that when we're damaged, you know, we're going to contact the excavator, figure out what's going on, and write a letter to them, that sort of stuff. In some states where they enforce it, we send the state a letter. But I'm not aware of knowing of a number or something to notify PHMSA. Is there one number, or is it a regional issue?
No, there's a one email, and it's I gotta look. It's like excavation damage at PHMSA.gov, but I'd have to look that up to make sure. And then there's also an online reporting form that they can report it through, and it goes through a team of PHMSA people who say, "That's this state. Let's turn it over to this community liaison that's responsible for those states."
I have a follow-up question to this one. Are you going to look at the delinquent excavators that have near misses, maybe not damage, but they continue to have near misses on the right of way?
Good question. So our law, the law that we promoted, does not take into account near misses. So in order for us to do, in order for us to do excavation enforcement, there's got to be damage to the pipeline. So whether that damage includes coating damage, tracer wire, or a dent on the pipeline, they have to make contact with the pipeline or the tracer wire before we can take enforcement actions in those states with inadequate laws.
I'm from Pennsylvania, and I had a question regarding the Class 1 gathering lines. And let me just set it up a little bit this way. There are over 380,000 conventional gas wells in Pennsylvania. With the shale plays in Pennsylvania, there are now over 14,000 unconventional wells. And these are well pads with multiple drill activity that's going underground and horizontally drilling in different directions. All of these wells are connected by pipelines to the transmission system. And the amount of pipeline in Pennsylvania alone is estimated to be over 100,000 miles. One more time, 100,000 miles of pipeline in Pennsylvania. They are exempt from the one-call law. And I guess I'm just kind of curious where PHMSA is on this Class 1 gathering line, and any hope that this may be something that PHMSA will look at to include as part of the one-call law.
So currently, right, Class 1 gas gathering is not regulated by PHMSA. Now, remember, jurisdictional and regulated are two different things, right? Everything is jurisdictional that carries gas, natural gas. It's what PHMSA regulates through exemptions of that law. With that being said, our excavation damage, right, we can only enforce it against regulated pipelines. Now, in terms of what we're looking at, capturing those gathering lines and making sure they're regulated, is that we are, that's part of our rulemaking. It was part of our future notice of proposed rulemaking that we're looking at to capture those. And it's a fine line between, if you want to get down to the weeds, it's a fine line between gathering and flow lines, right, that come from the wellhead, and then where that demarcation point is. But yes, there are Class 1 gas gathering. It could be a 30-inch high-pressure pipeline, and it's not regulated right now.
And then coming through high-consequence areas, through municipalities that are more densely populated than Class 1?
No. No, it has to be a rural, it has to be a Class 1 rural area. If it does come through, you know, populated areas, then that they drop that class. So it would drop under the regulated gathering.
Are you guys wearing out yet? I think we can do one more question, and then we're going to start thinking about the board reception tonight, where we might be able to bother these guys a little more, but you're welcome to bother me. I know a lot about this subject, so we want to carry this conversation on, and you're welcome to talk amongst yourselves. Can you guys do one more question? Sure. Got one more question out there? Oh, okay, I've got a question. You guys seem pretty knowledgeable about this subject, so can you walk out on the street and spot that next guy or gal that's going to dig a hole without locate? It's a little bit of profiling, but do you have an idea who that person is? Yeah.
Actually, if you look at, we've done some state surveys, and there are some attributes to certain types of people that are more likely to call than those that are not. So, for instance, those, and I don't have that data in front of me, but I can get it for you, that are in a slightly higher tax bracket are more likely to call, or economic bracket, sorry, are more likely to call if they're doing something at their home. And then those who have done a project before are more likely to call again. So once somebody's done a project, they're more likely to call again. So you don't see it sort of, you know, I did it once, I'm not doing it again. So those are a couple things that are of interest. there's probably a few more facts out of our state study that I could get for you. I just don't have them off the top of my head.
As far as specific to our data, there's two categories. One would be most frequent damagers, whether they call it one call or not. That'd be water or sewer work in our system. And if it were a no one call damage, it would be a landscaper, fencing contractor, concrete sidewalk curbing work. And that's just, I can show you the data for the last 10 years. So we've tracked it to that degree.
Are we done, folks? Hey, you're a great audience. We put a lot of work into getting the right people here and getting the right audience, and so I thank you a great deal.